Hey folks, some time ago I started creating a new library and taking advantage of that opportunity to play around with some new stuff. So I created an initial post about setting up a build with NUKE, and after weeks of procrastination it's finally time to take the next step, which is running this build we set up in a continuous integration environment. For this, we'll be using GitHub Actions because we are already using GitHub to host the code, so might as well use Actions as well to automate things. There are a lot of alternatives, but it's just simple to go with it. It's just side by side. So we'll take advantage of that. Let's immediately get started, jump into the code, but I warn in advance that this will be very simple because we just need some initial setup of the CI environment and then just call the NUKE script we created. So that's why even without NUKE it would be rather simple, but with NUKE even better because we just need to call it. So let's get started. We don't need to start. We can create stuff on the GitHub website, but we don't even need that. We can immediately start hacking on our code. So to create a new GitHub action or a workflow, we need to create a file in a special folder hierarchy. So we can create like GitHub /workflows/ and then give it a name, so ci.yaml, because this will be the workflow that I'll run to integrate the changes that happen. First thing we do, we can give it a name, so name ci, and this is the name that will appear on GitHub UI. So next thing we need, so the more important things that we'll have here is the build steps themselves, what we need to do, and the triggers, so what causes the workflow to start. So if we go to the docs, we have a bunch of stuff on how to check. So we can start a workflow when there is a push, we can start when there is a push or a pull request. We can do filtering, like only when it's a push to the main branch or a pull request to the main branch. Other things, trigger on page build as well, really created events. Don't know what it is, but okay, we have a lot of options, scheduled events, stuff like that. Again, I'm going with a very simple thing, so I will just go with this. I'll be copy pasting so it be faster. So we want on push. I'm not filtering any branch yet, and I added this weird thing here, which is workflow dispatch, which basically will make a button appear in the GitHub UI so we can trigger it. So this is basically because, at least for me, this never works the same time and the first time, and we want to build it again. And what ends up happening is we do commit, new commits, basically empty with a new space in there just to force a new build. So if we do this, we can just click and make it happen, better than doing adding all that trash to our commits, even though we can clean them up later. So this is for the trigger. Like I mentioned, a lot of options. For now, I just want every time I push things to run. With the triggers in place, now we need to define the build itself, so the steps that we need to do. We can, in a workflow, have multiple jobs. In this case, we'll have a single one. And then we can name it. I'll just call it build because why not? Then first thing we can define is the operating system in which we'll run. So I'm creating a library that will target .NET Standard 2.0 and 2.1. So we can choose whatever we want. Normally I go with Linux, so Ubuntu latest. Then we can actually create the steps. And basically in the steps we can do a lot of things, the setup, and then maybe call, if I wasn't using NUKE, it would be here where we would do like .NET restore, .NET build, and .NET test, and so on. In this case, because I'm using NUKE, I'm just going to do some setup. And keep in mind that NUKE has some integration with the CI environments, but because I wanted to play with the GitHub Actions and also probably doing some weird things with it, so I ignored that part of NUKE. But if you prefer not be messing with the YAML, NUKE can help you with that and can even generate the YAML file for you. So, but let's get back to the steps. So first step we want is to check out the code. So this step is just to check out the code to the running environment. And then I have a couple of steps here. So these two steps are for setting up the .NET SDK. So I'm setting up two SDKs. So I'm setting up .NET 5.0 and .NET Core 2.1. Why? I don't know if I showed that, probably not, but in the tests I'm targeting .NET Core App 2.1 and .NET 5. That's because I want to test .NET Standard 2.0 and 2.1, and these two runtime versions target specifically those .NET Standard versions, so implement the APIs for that versions. So I need both SDKs there in order for the tests to run correctly. This is just a detail, but yeah, I want the library to be run on both because I want to use .NET Standard 2.0 to allow for more clients to use it, but I want to use 2.1 to have some extra features, namely nullable reference type annotations, which I'm using to help with more recent code. So we need the two SDKs installed for that. When we run the tests, it will, because we are multi-targeting the test project, it will run the tests both for both SDKs. Now, after that, one thing we need to do, and of course I never remember this until I get the error, which is to give execution permissions to build.sh. So this is the bootstrapper script from NUKE, and after we give it those permissions, we can, let me give it now, we can invoke it with test, and this will start that process that we defined in NUKE. So in here we define all the process, so it will go until here .NET test. Now another thing we can do, even though probably overkill given that our library is pretty simple, but just in case, we can run the build and the tests in multiple operating systems. So we can do something like, we'll create a matrix, and what the matrix does is create variables that will depend on it. So in this case, we'll have a matrix with a variable OS, and that will be used for the runs on. And now we need to actually define the matrix. So let me grab this here. So to define the matrix, we create a strategy, then matrix, then define what we want. In this case, like I said, I want operating system, and then Ubuntu, Windows, and macOS. I could have more things like .NET SDK, and then have 2.1, or I don't know, and then replace somewhere. But in this case, let's keep it simple. And then the matrix would result in a combination of all. So in this case, we'll have 3 builds, but if we had, for instance, for each .NET SDK, we would have for each SDK 3 builds. So that would mean 6. Again, keeping it simple, even though we're doing more than needed. Now, we need to do some changes because it doesn't build exactly the same on all. So basically, now it will run on multiple operating systems, but for instance, the setup is the same, so no problem there. But for instance, this setting the shell permissions, we don't need that in Windows, and probably we would have an error. So we can have a conditional. If the OS is not Windows, then we do it. Otherwise, it will be ignored. And then we'll need to adjust this. So let me grab this thing here. And now what we have is the same, but when we are on Unix, so either on Ubuntu or macOS, we'll use the shell script. But if we are on Windows, we'll use the PowerShell script. And this is conditional. Now, I already pushed a version of this onto GitHub, so we can check how things went. So if I go over here, so to see things, we go over here to Actions. Then I have a bunch, like I said, never works the first time. And let's see, for instance, over here. So you can see we have the jobs. So in this case, even though we defined one job, because we have the matrix, it will be one job per entry of the matrix. In this case, there are 3, but like I mentioned, if we add more variables, it will multiply all of them and we'll end up with a lot of jobs. But in this case, just 3 jobs. We can click, see a bit more, and see how things went on, for instance, Ubuntu. And we can see the jobs, the steps that ran. We can see that build and test Windows didn't happen. If we go over here to Windows, then shell script permissions and build and test Unix didn't run. Instead, build and test on Windows. We can see details, and we see the logs from NUKE. See that restore, compile, test, all good. And inside test there are more things. So 33 passed tests, all good. We can also see that going to Actions, over here we have nothing, but if we choose our CI workflow, notice there's the option here, and we can run the workflow, choose a branch, and run the workflow there. And that's mostly it. Like I said, it's a simple build plan, not a lot going on. Just using the basic push and this workflow dispatch to trigger, doing a matrix just because of reasons, because our library doesn't really need it, but okay. It was an opportunity to play with the matrix and do these kinds of things and do the conditionals, stuff like that. And I think that's it. Hope this is a nice simple intro to get started, And if you want to learn more, of course, the docs and probably a lot more content. So that's it. In the coming post/video, we'll continue these things. Namely, we need to handle versioning of the library and eventually publishing the library to NUKE. But until then, hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you in the next one. See yous.